Good morning. Welcome back. We had another great day yesterday, and today will be no exception. We wanted to give a quick thank you to Delta for sponsoring the band at last night's Meet Your Sponsor and Exhibitor reception. They were great and a lot of fun. We hope you all enjoyed that. So we do have another great day planned for you today. I'd like to introduce to you a co-moderator for our first panel, NATCA's Director of Safety and Technology, Tom Adcock.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the third day of Communicating for Safety. I think we've got an exciting panel for you this morning, as well as one to follow later in the morning as well. I thought it was kind of appropriate that we show the Jetsons video. As I'm sure all of you were on Facebook earlier this year, George Jetson was born on July 31st of 2022, so it just seemed kind of appropriate to title the panel, Has the Jetsons Age Arrived? I want you to, we're going to be using a lot of alphabet, AAM, UAM, UAS. So in the CFS booklet in front of you on page 18 and 19, there's some terms in there and some graphics in there I think that will help you as we move through the conversation today. So if you need to take a look at that, that's a good reference. When I look back at communicating safety from 2019 as the training rep, I remember there being a panel on UAS, and at that time I was thinking, you know, it's still a ways off. But in my new role as a Director of Safety and Technology now after a couple of years, I think nothing could be further from the truth. There's been exponential growth over the last few years, and this growth is continued forecast to continue to accelerate. So that's the reason we're going to focus today on AAM entrants and how they're going to integrate into the current airspace structure. So the first panel this morning is we're going to focus on new entrants in that discussion. We have a couple of new entrants, Xwing and Joby, here with us, as well as some other panelists that are going to be able to broaden the topic. We have AUVSI here as well. And we're going to focus on that this morning. And then our former Executive Vice President, Trish Gilbert, is going to moderate the second panel, and she's going to focus on integrating these new entrants. I think much like what we experienced during the beginning of the jet age, this is going to be a new era in aviation, and everybody in this room is going to have a front row seat for it. So with that, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator. I worked with her collaboratively as when I was the training lead, Abby Smith, the Deputy Executive Director for the U.S. Integration Office.
Tom, thank you. Well, good morning, and Tom and NATCA, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this amazing panel and this wonderful conference. Tom and I have known each other and worked together on and off over the last 32 years, which I guess makes us both younger or older than the Jetsons, I guess. Starting out as controllers and then working in various innovation space. So at this point in both of our careers, it's a real honor to help lead the initiative to bring these exciting technologies safely into the national airspace system. You know, there's the Jetsons, but I also like the show The Big Bang Theory. And really, when you think about where we are in aviation, it's a renaissance. It's actually the Big Bang part of evolution. And it's really exciting, and there's so many new technologies, and our challenge is to do that safely. And safety is our North Star as FAA employees, and that will always be our North Star. And as we think about all these things from 1.5-pound drones all the way to autonomous vehicles the size of a C-5, we have to think about the fact that this is new, and our procedures, our regulations are going to be iterating and agile, but we're always going to do it in a safe way. So an example of what we're doing, just real quick before we get started, there is a UAS out there called Matternet, and it's used for UPS to deliver drones. Well, last week, Matternet got its type certification. And so if you think about that, there are 47 more of these new vehicles that are getting type certified that will become permanent institutions in the national airspace system. We're going to do that together, and we're going to do it safely. Thanks, Tom.
All right, thanks, Abby. So let's introduce the rest of our panelists. Let's start with our National UAM Article 114 representative, Will Hutson. The Chief Technology Officer for Xwing, Max Gariel. The President and CEO of the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International, Brian Wynne. And the Head of Government Affairs for Joby Aviation, Greg Bowles. All right. So Max, I want to start with you. I know we've got a video queued. We're going to play it here in just a second. So I think that's a great way to open up what we're doing. I know, Abby, you participated in flying in that aircraft, I believe it was yesterday?
Yeah, I was with Max yesterday in the Xwing, and I have to tell you, despite the fact I'm 55, I felt like I was 5 again. And it was, I mean, it was a blast, and so took lots of selfies, took lots of videos. It was amazing to be in a vehicle and sitting in the right seat with my arms back, watching the vehicle fly itself. It was fantastic.
All right, so let's play the video, please.
Xwing Control, test, radio check.
Test, Xwing Control has you loud and clear.
Xwing has control.
Xwing has control.
Xwing Caravan Concord ground, runway 1 left, taxi via Gulf.
1 left, main ramp to Gulf, Xwing Caravan. Auto taxi initiated. Caravan, clear for takeoff, 1 left close traffic approved. Auto takeoff initiated.
Xwing Caravan number 2, follow Cessna left downwind past the numbers, runway 1 left, clear to land number 2.
Clear to land number 2, 1 left, Xwing Caravan with traffic to follow in sight. 500, brake test pass, all systems green, continue auto land. Xwing Control is ready shut down.
All right, that's really cool. So I know you've got some slides queued up, ready to go, so why don't you go ahead and go through those with us and kind of walk us through Xwing and your concept of operations.
Sounds good, and thank you very much for having me. First of all, thank you for all that you guys do for us, for the general public to safely transport us, and also as a pilot, thank you for dealing with my accent and helping me navigate through the airspace without being too annoying on the radio. So thank you. So what we do at Xwing, our objective is really to serve communities and to bring to people the goods that. Oh, is it?
It's on the sideboard.
It's on. Thank you. Really to bring reliable deliveries for more people, to have the lifeline that those communities have been losing over the years. So we used to have a lot of air traffic going to small communities, and over the years with the pilot shortage, this has really diminished. So some of those communities don't have access to fresh food, fresh goods, and now it's a time to use the new technology and new capabilities we have to really give the gift of aviation to all those people. So the company was founded in 2016, and we started looking at what are the key challenges to integrating safely aircraft into the airspace. One of the key problems is to be able to see and avoid other traffic, and when we fly VFR or even IFR, it's the responsibility of the pilot to see airplanes that air traffic control did not give us. So we partnered with NASA and Bell to develop our first iteration of the detect and avoid system. And then we matured that system so that in 2019 we decided to put it on our own Cessna Grand Caravan. And in 2020 we started operating Part 135, delivering cargo for UPS with manned pilots. Our objective is not only to certify the aircraft, but also to certify the operations. Because as you introduce those new vehicles into the airspace, it's not just about the technology on board, it's how do you safely integrate from an operator point of view and also from an air traffic control point of view. So with all of our operations, we get feedback from the pilots about the day in and day out of the life of an aircraft. Like what happened today? What did the air traffic controller ask me to do? What kind of situation did I encounter? So we leverage all of this to get that information. And at this stage, we are able to fly from controlled airport to uncontrolled airport. We are with a remote operator controlling the airplane. So our technology is both on board the aircraft, so it's a redundant flight control system, so that in case of any failure, the system can take over, identify those failures and take over, as well as under the wings, you can see those blue pods that contains a lot of new sensors that we don't see typically on aircraft. So we have radars to detect other airplanes, we have LiDARs to be able to taxi safely, we have cameras, and we fuse all of this information to really replace the pilot. And then what you can see on the bottom is our control center. So we have somebody sitting in a room anywhere in the world, but talking to air traffic control and really replacing the voice of the pilot, so that the airplane, even though we say autonomous, is really following what this operator is doing. So the operator is always in touch with air traffic control, and air traffic control has no idea that the person is not sitting in the cockpit, but sitting somewhere else. So we look at the entire mission, so from pre-flight to loading, doing the weight and balance, all the way to navigating the airspace, either like in a pre-planned mission, or if we are being vectored, we can also execute those vectors, always with a very deterministic way of flying. And as our Part 135 I expanded quite significantly to be able to learn from different geographies, so we now fly in 12 states. We have 35 airplanes, and we've flown like 15,000 flights so far, so lots of very good learnings. All right. And if you want to watch the full video, just go on YouTube and look for Gate to Gate, and you will see like the 6-minute video, and you can really see and understand how our airplane interacts with air traffic control.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to grab that first question. It's kind of it's right one of the ones I've got. So during the flights, the experimental flights, are you in contact with air traffic control, and how does that work?
Yes, so we are always in contact with air traffic control. So we relay the voice from the ground to the airplane, and then the airplane can broadcast via VHF the radio. We can change frequencies of those radios from the ground, and we also have backup radios at our original destination airport in case the airplane radio doesn't function. And as we look to the future, CPDRC is obviously something that we really want to leverage to be able to reduce the reliance on the ground operator, and also increase the number of airplanes we can fly.
So I know one of the airports, especially I think that in that video you were flying out of Concord. So what interaction have you had with the controllers at Concord?
So actually, initially they were a bit surprised about what was going on. We spent a lot of time like taxiing and doing some strange things to tune the autopilot. But after a while, they understood that we always do the same thing. So when they ask us to do something, we will do exactly the same way. But we can also respond to everything they've been asking us. They want us to extend our downwind. We can do that with a single click. We need to do a left 360 for spacing. We can do it. So they're also very excited to see the new technology coming to those small airports, right? Usually those airports don't have all the technology that the large ones have. So being at the forefront of this new technology, I think has been very exciting. We had our local controllers come a couple of weeks ago, and it was a lot of very good feedback.
So how does the fact that your aircraft is remotely piloted affect the work of air traffic controllers?
So initially, it doesn't. It doesn't change. They don't know that there's nobody on the airplane. What they will see is that we perform much more deterministically than pilots. We are very predictable in what we're going to be doing. But we can also respond to some of the requests.
Okay. So can you explain lost link and then what Xwing is doing to mitigate that risk associated with lost link?
Yeah, so by lost link is the loss of communication between the ground station to the airplane. We have, first of all, like a redundant way of communicating with the airplanes, but in case this redundant link fails, then our airplane is going to be doing exactly what we told it to do. So we know exactly what airport it's going to be going. There is no decision being made on the go. The only decision that could alter the trajectory is if there was a conflict with another airplane, we could like deviate and then come back. But otherwise, it's going to be very predictable. So we will know at what time, at what airport it's going to be landing, even which runway we're going to be landing at. So it's just the same as if a pilot loses radio communication. Nothing to worry about there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Max. Greg, I think we're ready to cue your video. Let's play the Joby video, please.
So Greg, I haven't gotten to fly in a Joby aircraft, but I did make the mistake of flying in the simulator the day after I got my COVID booster. But it was an amazing vehicle to fly, and it was easy. And having had zero pilot training, I felt like I was in control the whole time. So they're piloted aircraft. This is a completely different concept. It's vertical takeoff and landing, electrified. So speaking of training, how do your pilots get trained?
Yeah, absolutely, Abby. And I do remember that day. You were a trooper. The COVID shot sometimes hits others harder than others. And Abby was successfully flew a takeoff and landing of the aircraft as she was almost falling asleep and then had to leave to go home. So thank you for that visit that time. The aircraft that you just saw is all electric. And as you saw, it can take off and land vertically. We can also do conventional takeoffs and landings, rolling on the runway. So it has a lot of flexibility. Now, as the pilot, to fly that aircraft, we've focused on using the existing pilots. So existing airplane pilots or existing commercial helicopter pilots take a transition course that's essentially like a type rating. And with that, you're certified, you're approved to fly the aircraft on a commercial 135 service. So that's the path we're headed down with FAA to operate these aircraft on a 135 here in the next few years.
So speaking of pathways, so I know one of your models is to be almost like an air taxi, be an Uber in the sky. So how do airports play into this?
Yeah, so I think we all jump to the Jetsons idea and think that we'll be flying everywhere, but people in this world, the air traffic control world, we understand that there's aviation infrastructure, right? So we're taking off out of the 5,080 public use airports, we're taking off and landing out of the over 10,000 public and private helipads around the US, and then over time, what is happening is we're seeing a lot of communities start to understand how this will shape convenience and use around the airport. So today we get a lot of airport noise complaints. I think you're probably familiar with that sometimes if you work a tower. And a lot of the folks around those airports, they don't use that airport every day. It's an inconvenience. But this starts to create an opportunity that airport is an asset to the people living around it. It's not others coming in, it's them using that to come and go. And that starts a whole new dynamic where people say, I want that in my neighborhood too, and this opens an idea for new heliports, new vertiports, and a vertiport is kind of like a quiet heliport. So the world we're kind of getting into, this community is like the leading edge of this electric age of flight, and it's going to be really exciting.
Okay, so you just said it. So I had said vertical takeoff and lift, that you threw in electric or eVTOL. So what's the big deal about electric?
Yeah, electric is really awesome. So we couldn't do what we're doing with these aircraft without electrification. You can imagine in the 1950s, we saw a lot of VTOL. We've seen some military VTOL that have been relatively successful. But electric lets you do things like every propeller you just saw, so 6 propellers on that vehicle being articulated in different ways through fly-by-wire, being controlled very, very quickly, faster than you could mechanically control them through electromechanics. And then each of those propellers is actually turned by 2 motors. So you saw 6 propellers, but there's 12 motors turning those 6 propellers. So that gives you this deep level of redundancy, and we can actually suffer multiple failures across that architecture and still be really robust. So electrification gives you really reliable and safe aircraft, cost effective as well. So we can start to look at our maintenance costs diminish because we have so few moving parts in the aircraft powertrain. And then noise is another really big issue. So I mentioned that we want to start moving much closer to where communities, where we start and end our day. Because these aircraft are like 1,000 times less acoustic energy in our hover, which is our loudest, than a helicopter would be, this opens brand new opportunities also. So it's a really exciting time. And what battery energy density can do is only going to grow. And we're going to see bigger, faster, farther electric aircraft over the next decade.
Yeah, I was kind of astounded at the noise level because, you know, you compared it with several different aircraft, and when the Joby aircraft was flying, it almost sounded just like wind.
Yeah.
You almost couldn't even hear it. So there's a question that came in, and it was about how do you, and you kind of started to touch on it, and it was about how do you handle bird strikes or engine failures?
Yeah, so we design a lot at Joby. So we make our own motors, our own batteries, our own high power electronics. We make our own propellers and the airframe. And so we're doing all that testing. So today when you come on site at our facilities in California, you'll find us doing things like certified bird strike for various critical components of the airframe. In fact, we're going through a very traditional FAA certification for commercial aircraft. So this is not like a drone. It is a traditional type certified vehicle with a pilot, built to carry people. And that's a really interesting, a lot of folks in the public don't really understand the big difference. I know this community knows the difference between like type certified aircraft and things that we're trying to find new ways. This fits firmly in the deeply tested type certified realm.
Thanks.
All right. Max, I did see one up here that I did want to go to you on. What is the response time from the time ATC instruction is given to that you have a response from the aircraft?
So it's no more delay than a pilot. So the voice comes within like milliseconds to the airplane when we're in the terminal airspace. And we have worked really hard to have very easy to use user interface for the remote operator. So there's no like waypoint dragging and setting the flight plan. It's a one-click action to do, for instance, the 360s or the extend downwind or left turn. So very, very simple interface. So the response time is minimal. And then when we're up and away, so like in the center, there will be slightly more delay, maybe like half a second or so, because we're going to be using satellite communication. But those are places where typically pilots would take more time to respond. So we're very careful that we know how precious the bandwidth is, and we know that we have to be really fast, so we're working hard for that.
All right, thanks. So I know both you are working towards AM on different timelines. So can you just give me Max, I'll start with you. How are you approaching this? How are you going about doing this?
Sorry, could you repeat the question with the sound?
Sure. So you're both working towards autonomous flight. You're there really, and just how did you approach it? How did you go about doing that? What?
Oh, so we've started. We have for experimental aircraft we have a safety pilot on board. So our system in the prototype system that we have a safety pilot that is able to disconnect our system and fly the caravan just like it's a conventional caravan. But all of the operations are being conducted from the ground. So yesterday we flew with Abby and a few of our colleagues for about 2 hours. The system was engaged for the entire time, and we had to deviate to avoid some traffic, and all that was conducted from the ground. In the current configuration, if anything goes slightly off the limits, the pilot will disconnect and can also talk to ATC if the remote operator is not performing as we want it to be. So taking a progressive approach and really flying as much as we can to get all those learnings. Regularly, we see that there are behaviors that we did not anticipate, so we get back to the, not drawing board, but like we implement these new functionalities and go test them.
Greg, I know your timeline is different. You're going with piloted to begin with, but in the long term, what approach are you taking for that?
So at Joby, what we're doing, so I described this very deep vertical path for us where we're building the aircraft, certifying, building the aircraft and a lot of the components. We are also, we stood up our own Part 135 commercial certificate recently. So I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months ago. We have a clean sheet 135 that came online, and we're flying Cirrus aircraft there. The reason we're doing that is because, for us to bring this service into being out here around the country, we need to have a fresh certified aircraft, and we need to have that commercial operating certificate. By bringing that operating certificate online now, it lets our pilots, our procedures, our interactions with the FAA on that certificate get mature, so that when we add this new aircraft on, there are not so many moving pieces at the same time. When we created this new 135, we worked with FAA eyes wide open, right? So we didn't just say like, hey, we're just flying a Cirrus. No, we said like, please come see, understand, and from all levels of the FAA, we had engagement where they understood, okay, the long-term goal is to operate this new electric aircraft. Let's build a very robust, very serious 135, way too rigid for what a normal Cirrus operation would be, but it's right-sized for this new operation. And so we're on a really strong path there to begin operations here really soon around the country. What's exciting, and you can experience this yourself, over at the booth, we have a simulator that lets pilots understand how to fly it, and a lot of the controllers and the team have come through and got a feel for flying these aircraft. It is normal voice comms, it's normal navigation, Mode S transponder, ADS-B 1090 spectrum, very standard stuff from the interaction standpoint, but the pilot is able to fly these aircraft in a pretty simple way. You're not tilting nacelles, you're not rating up and down RPM or deflecting surfaces, you're expressing intent. So you say like, I would like to go faster, I would like to go left, I would like to go up or down. So your controls translate directly into those motions. You're not responsible for tilting a nacelle, for example, like you would be in a classic airplane. And that all happens through fly-by-wire. That affords us an ability to add a lot of protection and automation. So classically in light airplanes, stall spin loss of control, stall spin, has been a really fatal issue. We've been able to put envelope protection onto these aircraft so that we can prevent those kind of things. And we've been able to design our flight control system so that we don't go into exceedances. We won't compromise the structure through full deflections and things like this. So you can go give that a try and see what it's like. And what happens is the pilot can now focus on the interactions with air traffic control, more of the air-minded thinking, getting ahead of the weather, the stuff that we're really good at as humans. And I love tail draggers and deflecting surfaces, but I'll do that like when I'm hanging out for fun on the weekend, and then when I'm flying folks commercially, being able to focus on these like real high-minded things is really going to take us into a new era of safety.
So I saw one drop off, but you mentioned how quiet the aircraft is. And one of the things that someone spoke to is, I know a lot of communities are talking about visual noise. How is Joby addressing that? How are you?
It's a great question. So there's really two issues in the world. So there's real noise, where people call and it was pretty loud, and we all say, that was a little loud, but it'll be okay, it won't be loud next time. That's kind of what we do today. And then there's I didn't actually get bothered by the noise. I noticed that aircraft and it annoyed me, so I complained, right? So that we call that visual noise. So those are the two kinds of noise we hear complained about. So we went directly after the first one, right? Actual noise. So we've designed this aircraft to be really quiet. The way we're able to do that, electric motors let us make a huge amount of torque at really low RPM. So if you've had a chance to ride in a Tesla where you touch the pedal and you're like instantly back in your seat, you don't have to rev up, that's what electric motors afford us. So we can turn these propellers really slowly, but paddle a huge amount of air, and that lets us get really quiet, like really quiet. So when you come see it, just a side warning, half the people that come see it quit their job and join the company because they're like, this is amazing. So when you get out to see it, you've been warned. The other piece is the visual noise. So visual noise is like, that's not for me, and I don't like that person near my house with that aircraft. What's also really important here is electric starts to open the door so more folks that aren't part of aviation come in. The way we're going to offer these flights is through an app-based opportunity at the cost around an Uber Black. So we're shooting for the $3 to $4 a mile kind of rates that is similar to an Uber on a per mile basis. That means we're all going to start to do this. And so I draw a parallel. We complain about VIP helicopters because we're not in them. But that Amazon truck, like running down the street, almost driving your kids off the road, we're like, get out of the way, kids. It might have my package, right? Because there's something in it for us. This is similar. Like, this is going to bring more folks into aviation, and there's going to be something in there for all of us. So really, this new world can start to really bring more folks in.
So, I think that's a great segue, because Brian has been in this innovation space for a while now. And Brian, I have no doubt you have learned some lessons from the different autonomous vehicles that you've helped as your association bring to market. So can you share some lessons from the drone integration that could apply here to advanced air mobility?
Sure, and it's not fair to say that this is just a supersized drone. But to me it's fascinating, and the reason I got into this was because of exactly what you said: the electric motors, instantaneous torque, et cetera. And as microprocessor speeds get faster and software gets more elegant, things that we can do are just boggle the mind. But yes, I think to answer your question, Abby, one of the things that I've paid a lot of attention to over time is sequencing. A lot of different things coming together at the same time, converging. That's been true of technology. Pick a technology and you see this, we think it's going here, but then it converges with something else and it creates something we hadn't seen coming, and that's what's fun about this. But in the world of things flying around in the airspace where we need predictability, and there are regulatory things, we have to pay attention to sequencing. Good example of this from the UAS side of the world is remote identification. Right? We were, I think, a hair's breadth from having an NPRM release on flight over people for UAS, and all of a sudden it disappeared. And it disappeared because somebody at the FBI said, well, no, we're not letting drones fly over people if they're not squawking. Now, who thought it was a good idea to have an aircraft flying around in the airspace that wasn't squawking? I don't know. I didn't think that was a good idea. But the truth of the matter is that remote identification, which we knew was going to be on the docket at some point, went from wherever it was to the top priority. And even then, it was, we had a aviation rulemaking committee 4 years later, an NPRM comes out, and now we're getting to implementation. That is the kind of thing that we need to think through a little bit better. And I say we collectively. I remember, anyway, enough about remote identification. It makes my point about sequencing. We've got a lot of different things that are coming together. We need to be able to sort of put them up on the board and not get wedded to what that board looks like, because it's, if we think we got it right, we'll need to revisit it in a couple of months and check and see what's changed.
So your organization not only does things that are flying that are cool and new, but you also do land, you do, and marine.
I can't hear you, Abby, I'm sorry.
So you also do land and marine. Can you talk about some of the other vehicles that you've seen some change in transformation?
Yes. I mean, to me, this is the best part of what we do in the community is we look at these technologies across different domains. I mean, we're all talking about airspace here, and I think, and as I mentioned yesterday, I've been a pilot for almost 30 years now, any minute now, and so it's pig and slop category for me that I ended up in this job. But what's interesting to me about what we're doing here is that the technologies will apply in other domains. But each one of those domains has a very different regulatory history. And if I had a nickel when I was working on electrification of vehicles and infrastructure, which was my previous job through 2014, if I had a nickel for every time I had an automobile executive say to me, I don't want the government designing my cars, I could have retired long ago. And when you think about it, that's not the reason why we have such a poor safety record necessarily on the ground relative to the air. But it's just a very, very different regulatory framework. What I'm looking for increasingly is where are the enabling technologies that we can test out in the airspace without degrading safety, and you saw examples of that with Xwing and Joby right here, and then because there are fewer things to hit up there. Right? And I know big sky theory doesn't cut it when you're flying through New York airspace, but the principle applies. If we can do this and we can figure out how to scale it in the airspace without degrading safety, and I would argue we can do it and improve safety. I'll get back to that if somebody wants to ask me a question about what I think about that. Then we can apply it in circumstances where, down on the ground, for example, where there are a lot more things to hit. Things are vastly more complicated in some respects, and where we've just got an atrocious safety rate, frankly, partly because of drivers like me, I suppose. But and I'll be the first one to give it up once I'm convinced that the technology works on the ground. You can have my steering wheel and pedals.
So I want to combine a question that came in, and it was around network security with another question. And so so you see this really strongly with UAS right now. These are very autonomous vehicles. So how do autonomous vehicles really fit into the world, and how do we deal with this network security challenge?
Yeah, cybersecurity is something that I used to say, well, everybody's got this problem, we'll figure it out. I don't think about it that way anymore, and neither does my team or our people in the community. We realize that, use my example of a car with no steering wheel and pedals, I'm not going to get in that thing if I think it can be hacked. And then we've got all kinds of other issues that, let's face it, we've kind of built the airspace and the systems that we fly for safety, not necessarily for security. But the truth of the matter is that the uncrewed world is really started with military applications, and we know how to do it. We know how to do it securely. What we've seen, though, is we've seen this tremendous push from another side of the world, literally in some instances, with elegant technologies that can be applied in many, many different ways. And that's caused a concern both from a safety as well as a security point of view, because the first objective wasn't necessarily security. So how do we get to a place where we can have what I like to call assured autonomy, where the general public, which is the long pole in the tent, frankly, public acceptance is the long pole in the tent for all of this technology, that the public, along with everybody in this audience, can be assured that that autonomy is predictable, and it's not just safe, but it's it's going to, if it fails, it's going to fail safe. So these are the kinds of things that we're now leaning in on, and we've started a partnership, and we've started getting our experts in the same companies, but very different people from inside of those companies that all realize, yeah, and the association exists much like your union, because we're trying to do things that we can't do by ourselves. None of these companies can get everything done by themselves. That's the reason why we associate with each other, to basically make sure that we get to the goal faster, by channeling all that innovation, all that energy, and frankly, all that political footprint. What we're converging now with is an effort that others have looked into and said, basically, okay, there are no standards for this, so if you're going to sell to the Army, you need to come to this level. A group called Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, has come to us and said, everybody wants that certification, even though they're not going to sell to the Army, and we don't have time to certify everybody to that level. So what's below that level that would give us the right pathway to assured autonomy, and then if we need to move it up to the military level, we can do that. So we have these military levels. We know how to do it. We just have to be able to do it in a way that scales for everybody.
Yeah. And so thank you for your association and taking that on for the country. Really appreciate it. Tom?
So you all are sending in some great questions. Jimmy Smith's doing a great job in the back moderating these and keeping these fresh for us, so keep those coming in. We're going to be getting to some more of these questions in just a minute. But I did want to start with a full panel question here, and Will, I'm going to start with you. So what gaps in commercial aviation do you see AAM filling?
Well, I think there's a lot of them, Tom. I think Joby started out with it. You see, we have a lot of infrastructure that's maybe unused today. You see people in rural remote areas that aren't able to get proper health care, timely health care, package deliveries. Think about someone that might want to live out in a beautiful countryside somewhere but still wants to travel every once in a while. You might not want to get in your car for 3 hours to drive to a major airport to be able to fly somewhere. So I think as we dive further into this, every day we're finding more and more things that we can do with this exciting new technology. So I'll let these guys add on.
All right. Max?
Same thing as I was discussing during my during the slides. Excuse me, being able to serve communities and get to those people. We get emails very regularly from people that have lost their connection, that they have an airplane but they don't have a pilot. So how do they get their produce, like a gallon of milk for $16, $17 because it was shipped like 2 weeks ago, and there's a single airplane. So this is what I'm really excited about, to be able to change how people are connected, how they get access to all that people who live in the cities get access to, and also eventually get to transporting people, right? As we're saying, it's going to change communities, how we live, and also leverage the 5,000 airport that we were discussing earlier. Like, we're all paying for those airports, but only few people use them. So we need to really take advantage of those and bring community prosperity around those airports.
Right.
I think about it from the standpoint of congestion and capacity. We have a lot of capacity out there that we're not utilizing. And on the ground, we just, I'm watching Route 66 going out of Washington, D.C. toward, to the west, and it's like, I can't count the number of lanes now, and then you got hot lanes and everything else. There are ways of feeding into, closing these gaps and feeding into major metropolitan areas that this is going to enable, and I'm really, really excited about that. And it's going to increase our capacity, just give people more options.
Great.
And so I think what's exciting, first of all, about this question is that we're all kind of sitting here like, yeah, this is reality. 5 years ago, folks weren't ready to wrap their heads around this, but now we're kind of like, I get it, I understand it. This is a cool age to be living in. So where does it go? I think, like, I'll sit out at night with my wife on the porch and kind of think, like, hey, just a few years from now, we live in DC area, and I'll say, like, we could go up to Philly and have dinner, right? We could just, like, hop a quick flight up to Philly and come back home like an Uber, right? And so that world is exciting. Being able to, so today, with cars, we move about 15 miles in 30 minutes. When we were on trains, we only moved 10 miles in 30 minutes. It was horses before that. Our circle of activity was 5 miles with horses, and before that was feet. If you look at the ancient city of Rome, it's a 1.5 mile city. That's 30 minutes on foot. And so we're about to introduce technologies that, like, at the snap of a finger, move us 80 miles in 30 minutes. That is a very powerful tool, right? We've had cars for 100 years, and that has formed society. The jet age came about and linked us, like, the really long distances, and that has been revolutionary. We're about to fill in the gap, and that's really cool. So it's kind of like a long conversation around drinks, I think, is how we figure out where it's going.
So Tom, I want to jump in here too, because it's been kind of inferred here, but I mean, when you think about the fact that we live in a democracy, and democracy means equal access. And I think what's really exciting about advanced air mobility for me is that this is an opportunity for the first time, really, for aviation to be democratized and have a point of entry that's accessible to everybody, not just privilege, because it's just going to be that much more accessible. And it brings the beautiful national resource that we have, that's the sky, to the country in a really meaningful way, which parlays into my question for Will, because clearly I'm fired up. So what is it about this passion and excitement that might be keeping controllers up? Or is it more like stress and anxiety?
That's a great question, Abby, and honestly for me, the answer to that is yes. There's a lot to be excited about. I started flying when I was 15 years old, and I can tell you it didn't look anything like what we just saw on that screen there. But it's new, and you know, controllers, we like a certain level of certainty, knowing what we're going to be, how we're going to handle these things, what we're going to do with them. But I think you bring up another point with that question that I think is probably most important. And it is that if we work together, if we roll our sleeves up, if we all collaborate and we do this right, then the controllers, our workforce, the other users of the system can concentrate on being excited and not stressed and anxious. And so that's what I look forward to doing with all of you.
So I'm going to go there. Controller staffing. It's a hot potato issue at the FAA. Did you know that?
No idea.
Surprise.
With many controllers posed to retire in the near future, what should we be thinking about as far as training the next generation of controllers? Something that's near and dear to my heart, as Tom and I worked on the last time we were working together. And what do you think that they really need from us right now?
Excellent question, and it's been a theme of the conference so far. We've talked a lot about staffing, and I think it goes without saying, as these operations start to increase, we're going to need more controllers to work airplanes, but it's not going to be, you know, day one, snap your fingers, and we're going to have 1 million of them flying around. But to both your points, really, it's the training that's going to be key. Just like we talked about the stress and the anxiety piece, right? If we know what's expected of us and what we need to do to work these correctly, then I think we'll have a great chance at being successful. So really, we need to evolve as AAM comes on board. We need to train early, often, and really, really take it the bull by the horns, if you will, to make sure that we're giving everybody that's going to work these airplanes the tools they need to be successful.
You're talking our language there. I like
What's that? Oh yeah, done.
So we have some, we actually have some new questions up here. So let's start. Greg, I'll go to you. What is the duration or endurance of a single battery charge and conversely recharge time for aircraft?
Awesome, yeah. So the aircraft we've built, we have kind of industrialized the best state-of-the-art you can industrialize. So there's research in batteries that's pretty cool and exciting, but we have to industrialize like a safe known technology, and so we've done that. And our aircraft, there's a great YouTube video. We were telling folks that we would fly 150 miles and then have a VFR reserve that was going to be like kind of the max range. There's a lot of skepticism, and so we just quietly did it and then posted it on YouTube. So there's a YouTube video you can watch us fly circles in the sky to prove out the range and the endurance of the aircraft. Now, our typical flight is not going to be that 150-mile trip. Our typical flight is going to be those 20, 30, 40, 50-mile trips that are extremely annoying because of traffic, because of geographical constraints. Like, we have the Chesapeake Bay on the East Coast, on the West Coast, we have like a lot of congestion. And so moving these distances very quickly and efficiently is the goal. And so if we do one of those flights, for example, the median flight that we think we'll be doing is around 25 miles, which will take us about 15 minutes to fly. And a lot of times those car trips are going to be over an hour, right? So you're really saving folks some time. To recharge that flight, we will put passengers on and off in about 5 minutes, and in about the time we put passengers on and off, we'll be able to recharge that amount of energy. Over time, we'll see this industry improve even further from there, but this stuff is ready right now, and this is like literally what we're certifying with FAA, so it's exciting times.
All right, Max, for you, when making cargo deliveries to remote areas, how do you ensure a secure and stable uplink to control and maneuver the aircraft at all times?
Yeah, so for any Part 135 operations, you start by demonstrating that you can fly the routes. So the initial deployment will require us to go from origin airport to destination airports to make sure we have a stable link at both locations. And then also by having redundant data links, so using a combination of satellite communication, line of sight radios that may be installing, as well as phone communication just on the ground where we're allowed to use it, we can ensure that we have a reliable communication. And again, I didn't show that, but the aircraft is always doing the safe thing. So as we taxi throughout the airport, for instance, the aircraft has a map of the airport and will never enter like a runway before, without being authorized by the remote operator, for instance. So that prevents the aircraft, even if we lose the link, to do anything that would endanger other people.
So I've got one.
Okay.
So this is for NATCA. That's you, Will.
Oh, thank you.
Is there a concern with all these additional remote ID transponder aircraft cluttering scopes, and how will this be addressed?
There absolutely is a concern, and we brought that up. We just wrapped up a work group called the Near-Term Integration Work Group for UAM, and we actually did a whole subsection on that. And to be quite honest, we're still exploring it. This is early, and they're really, when we look at remote ID, ADSB, and honestly what the controllers see, that's where we're going to have to rely on the men and women of the National Airspace System that work every day to know what they want to see and what will help them be able to be successful and make sure we ensure that these operations are safe, because there might be some instances where we don't want to see every one of these, but there's going to be some where we really need to know not just a primary, but who is that, what are they doing, and how's it going to work. And so I know there's different channels on ADSB. We've talked to some of the more of the tech ops side of the experts of that, of Spectrum, and how we're going to be able to bring this on. But I come back to what I said earlier. I think it's easy to get really excited and spun up and say, okay, what are we going to do? This is going to crash the NAS. Well, we're not going to have 1 million of these flying day one, right? We're going to do this safely, efficiently, and we're going to integrate them on kind of the crawl, walk, run approach, right? So, but it is something that we need to pay very close attention to.
Okay. So I can't tell you, you all are asking some great questions from the audience. So here's another one. So how do you envision interacting with weather and deviations around the weather and the potential workload increase to controllers? So let's just, how are you going to handle the weather deviations for an autonomous aircraft in the event of a convective activity?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the most challenging situations where right now, like, people have weather radars and also can look at the windows. So by being able to downlink the weather radar information to the operator, then we can make some of those decisions. Then we can also leverage a lot more data coming from ground infrastructure that is fed real time to the aircraft. So currently in the aircraft we have limited connectivity, so there might be delay on the weather information we get. When the operator is on the ground, we can leverage all the sensors that are around the country and have a really good view of the weather.
Okay. Abby?
Yeah, I've got one, and I think this is really more for Greg. Where in the NAS do you see these operations? Because it kind of goes with the question that I just asked Will. Where do you see these, and how are you going to integrate in busy areas? Where are you going?
It's an important thought process. So in the early days, there'll be very few aircraft, right? We can only build at a very methodical pace. And this industry is slowly coming along, so you'll see some more coming along through the next few years. Our airspace itself is huge, but the places you all have to control, we're trying to get a lot of aircraft onto a little single skinny line, right? We're trying to get them onto that critical tarmac. The infrastructure we just talked about, those 5,080 airports, most of them are uncontrolled, right? But over time, we're going to see aircraft starting to use that infrastructure more and more, which is actually a pretty awesome opportunity for folks that are involved in aviation, like this crowd. I mean, it's kind of the renaissance of aviation, where we, as a society, start to use aviation more and more and grow into all that infrastructure. And so that's the beginning steps, is we grow into all that existing infrastructure that's out there. And then we're going to start to want to add infrastructure. People are going to say, like, I don't want to have to go 20 minutes to my local airport. I want to go 5 minutes on my bicycle to the park nearby and have a little 50-foot spot that lets me start to use these aircraft. And so then we grow into that kind of infrastructure. But then we get into the issues eventually, the 10 to 15-year horizon. We get into the world where the airspace does get pretty congested pretty broadly. And that's where we really need to be focusing as a team here. How do we do things like make sure the scope is decluttering and helping people understand what is on a path that's known and clear and what needs to be discussed and addressed? That's a really exciting time for us to be talking about. We have time to get to that conversation, and we're going to learn a lot in the early years with these like very typical operations that we're going to start with. Those times can really, like, if the U.S. does this well, if we do this well as a community, we will lead the next era of the economy, right? The nations that do this well will lead the future economy. Nations that don't, won't. We are really at an advantage right now with the system we have, the smart people we have, and where we stand. And it's only ours to lose. So I'm like really excited to get into these deeper conversations that we need to start thinking of for the 5, 15, and beyond conversations.
Thanks.
All right, another question for Max. Let's see, where did it go? How many aircraft will an operator be responsible for at one time?
So at the beginning, we're looking at one operator for one aircraft. We know how critical being able to talk to ATC is on the airport environment, in the terminal airspace. So it's going to be one-to-one at the beginning. Eventually, what we see is one-to-one on the airport environment plus the terminal airspace. And as we go into the more like up and away type of flight, maybe one operator monitoring several airplanes. Also, as CPDRC comes into play, the control will be able to direct the aircraft directly with the operator just monitoring the comment coming in and just saying like, yes, we're all good. So there will be a lot less voice communication required. So the operator will be free to handle more and more aircraft. So, but one-to-one to start with.
So that, Greg? Is your aircraft a Part 23 certified power-lifted aircraft, or is it something else?
Awesome, yeah. So this is like a really good geeky certification question, which I love. So when we certify aircraft, we have a couple choices. They can be airplanes, Part 23 or Part 25, like the airliners. If it's a helicopter, they can be little helicopters or big helicopters, that's 27 or 29. Or they can be something else, which is like powered lift and other things. So the FAA has decided the best path forward for these aircraft is to treat them as powered lift in the certification realm, where they've borrowed very heavily from the rules for airplane, helicopter, and then also a couple specific rules. So our certification basis, or the stack of rules that we have to comply with, kind of includes all of those pieces. So it's really deep and thorough to go through all of the challenges of an airplane, all of the challenges of a helicopter, and all of the challenges of electric and some of the fly-by-wire and these other capabilities on the aircraft. So that's been put in place with us, and I'm hoping very soon you'll all have a chance to actually see that in the Federal Register. That'll be exciting when that gets out there. And then from that point, we've been working with the FAA on the testing, the things we have to do to show we've met that stack of rules, and getting into the conformed flight test. And so we've been methodically doing this. From 2017, we flew our first full-scale aircraft. We applied for official certification with the FAA in 2018, and we've been working day in and day out with teams doing that. And now we're at a really mature stage. We went from the theoretical, how are we going to do this? And those conversations were in 2018, 2019. We kind of figured out what is the really robust, safe way to do that, all the tests, the thousands of things that need to happen. And then we laid out a schedule for how we're going to execute that. We're into execution. So really exciting times. And I already kind of told you in the beginning, the air carrier part of this is in place and growing and getting mature. The aircraft is coming along. And so I'm super excited to be able to talk to the NATCA team and others, the air traffic conversation. It's time to really understand that.
Great.
So let's talk about vertiports, because in 2015 we had a circular about vertiports. We realized we didn't know what we didn't know, and we rescinded it. And so now we have a draft engineering brief that's about ready to come out of draft and be out there as a temporary fix until we get smarter. So vertiports, how many do we actually think? And Brian, you might want to weigh in here too, from a higher level than just a company-specific answer. What does this infrastructure look like, and how ubiquitous is it going to be?
You want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So from the Joby perspective, we'll be operating, instead of doing regional and long distance flights, we're going to be operating around communities and municipal areas, right? So every night those pilots will go home in their community. They'll operate from location to location around the community. It starts with all those existing airports, and we start to add vertiports as it becomes like really convenient. The exact number is going to depend on how fast this all grows. From the perspective of successful operations, the existing infrastructure, we're ready to go. There's actually a really great NASA report that came out that went through some of this. And in fact, there was another tabletop exercise that looked at Dallas specifically. And we worked with the folks at NASA to kind of show what controller interactions could look like, what things you're already doing that are really clever to leverage the existing system that can kind of be employed around the country. And so it is a very gradual question. Out of World War II, we built 6,000 airports in the US. Are we going to hit one of those pinnacle moments and have a ton of vertiports? I don't know. That's really for society to decide. But we're starting from a really strong spot.
Great. Ryan?
Yeah, I feel compelled to say calming things here, because if I'm sitting out there with you guys, that might 6,000 number might freak me out. But I think on the one hand, there's a tremendous enthusiasm for this idea, and we have vertiports popping up, including on top of the FAA. Right? So without any complete notion of at what point they will be needed or completely useful. And I think I know that everybody here understands that at the end of the day, there's going to have to be a crawl, walk, run approach to this, and we don't snap our fingers and be at scale. And we have to execute this perfectly, which is hard to do, but it's what I would challenge our community to do, the aviation community writ large. But I think it's a function of making certain that we don't overload the system. A lot of that goes back to what I was talking about yesterday with automation. This is not something that, automation doesn't mean we're after your jobs. Quite the opposite. It means making your jobs more tenable, more predictable, even though there are a lot more targets, not necessarily on their scope, but out there. There's certain principles that we need to keep embedded in our thinking here. One of which that I like to think about is that uncrewed aircraft are generally going to yield, and particularly in environments where everybody has to collaborate and cooperate, literally cooperate. Uncrewed aircraft have got to yield to traditional aviation. It's as simple as that. And so, unless you're actually in the system and you're talking to air traffic control, there's a little bit of a gray area there. But if it's an completely automated vehicle, then it's going to have the ability to tap into the system, the existing ATC system, know where things are, including things that aren't necessarily collaborating or cooperating like in an EMS helicopter, and yield to that. We have to build those systems, and once we've built those systems, then I think it's, let the flowers bloom.
All right, let's go back to Slido. I see a couple of questions up here. So, Max, I'll start with you. What's the target number of aircraft that you're planning on adding into the system?
So our system retrofits existing Cessna Caravans, so it will not be a net addition of aircraft. It's going to be retrofitting as many as we can, right? We see every day now in our 135 operations, like hiring pilots or retaining pilots is extremely difficult, especially for the feeder cargo market, where it's probably the lowest pay. It's you fly an hour in the morning, an hour at night. You might be sleeping every night in a hotel room or spending your day in a hotel room. Those are the places where it's almost impossible to find and retain pilots. So what we're going to be doing is using those existing airframes that already fly, and eventually we're going to be able to fly them more often. So instead of flying 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour at night, they may be flying several times a day. So no new airframe, but probably more traffic happening because they will be flying more often.
Greg?
Yeah, so from our perspective, it's going to start with one, that aircraft's out there, and then in various regions, as we kind of figure out if there's enough demand, if there's enough airspace, if there's enough infrastructure, we'll kind of grow. And so it will be very organic. It's going to be a collaboration. In fact, we've had really good conversations with air traffic regions around the country to really understand, how regional some of these solutions need to be, and some of the ways that traffic can be optimized without causing headaches. So I think that's the early days, is like a gradual fill in to underutilized areas around controlled spaces. And what's probably going to happen is we're going to grow into needing more controlled airspace, right? We're going to need more towers. We're going to need more controllers doing more work over time around the country as aviation becomes more of a key backbone for the nation. So that is going to be a collaboration together as well. I think this will be something society's demanding, right? As aviation becomes something they get more excited about and everyone uses, instead of just for vacation, they're using on a more daily basis, all of this becomes more important. And that is a good place to be.
Thanks, Greg.
I've got one for Max.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. So I've read your resume, and I know how creative of a person you are. And the question that was posed is, do you see this technology that you're deployed right now on a Cessna Caravan going to larger aircraft? So I'm really curious to hear your answer.
Yeah, so the technology we're developing is really, we would say like 80% agnostic of the airframe and 20% is really close to the airframe. Like when you talk about flight controls, like where you put your servos, like what are your inner loops for control so it flies smoothly. But most of it, like the remote operating center, the detect and avoid, most of the outer loops are agnostic of the airframe. So as we move in time, as a company, we're thinking like, where should we go? Should we go like up to larger airframes, or should we go to maybe like the type of Joby where we have more aircraft coming online and hiring pilots is going to be almost impossible, so they will have to become autonomous. So we don't know yet what comes next, but I'm sure the technology we are developing can be extremely useful for both existing crewed aircraft, so like the detect and avoid system can be put on general aviation aircraft, on helicopters, eventually on business jets, and all the way to the top, right? When we taxi, we have a really good understanding of the surroundings, so we know where our wingtips are, we know where all the objects are. So I could see this technology going on larger liners to avoid wing clipping when they taxi, right? So I think the technology is going to really be spread out maybe in smaller pieces, but it will benefit the entire industry.
And it just reminds me of in the UAS test site up in Alaska, there are huge aircraft that are uncrewed right now or remotely piloted.
Right. So I really appreciate the audience's great questions. I do have one more question I want to give everybody an opportunity to answer before we run out of time. So as we move forward, as the development of AAM moves forward, are there areas or issues that you feel that we need to focus on or really pay closer attention to? Will, I'll start with you.
Yeah, again, this is new and exciting stuff, and I think it's really easy to get hyper-focused just on what we're doing here and forget about the legacy operators in the NAS, the airplanes that are carrying 350, 400 people versus 3 or 4 people. I think that it's going to take a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of collaboration and communication amongst all of the users to find the best way to bring this new entrant to service in the NAS and to do it safely and efficiently. So again, when you look at it, we don't want to forget about everybody else, and that's easy to do because this is new and exciting stuff. So that's from my perspective.
Thank you, Max.
I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I really we don't have all the answers yet, right? The technology is being matured. We are testing it on a daily basis, and I would like actually NATCA to be part of the table and tell us, like, how do you see us operating? Like, what are the things that you really care about so that we don't make mistakes as we develop the technology? We need the input from all the controllers because it's going to be changing some of the ways things are working, right? Even though as we're trying to be completely transparent, the airplanes are going to behave slightly differently, right? Because it's going to be more predictable. So what are the things that controllers care about? How do we make your lives easier? And how do we really integrate safely into the airspace? So I'm here to, you know, not bridge the gap, but like get to know the community, what are the needs, and really factor that in as we develop our system.
Thank you. Brian?
I was on a Senate hearing panel one time, and there was a guy from the technology world that started talking about the internet and permissionless innovation, and I started to lean away from him. You know, this is not permissionless innovation. We like innovation. Innovation's a good thing. The technology is kind of like the weather. You don't really control it. You just kind of got to work with it and try to make it work for you. And sometimes it gives you tailwinds, sometimes it doesn't. This is really exciting stuff. And so I tend to think about it as, you know, even though Congress has told you guys to integrate Uncrewed into the airspace, I think, you know, right now where we are is really with all of these things is we're just kind of, we're accommodating. We're trying to figure out how to accommodate. Integration is a complicated thing. And it's, you know, what we're trying to integrate is changing and becoming dynamic and more exciting. But if we step back and we look at this from a slightly different time horizon, then we'll see that what we're really trying to get done here is we're trying to evolve the airspace for the future. And if we keep that in mind, then there are tremendous opportunities for us to utilize the airspace much more efficiently than we currently do and create tremendous societal benefits. If we don't keep that in mind, then we're going to fight each other. And just candidly, that's no fun. You know, it's way, way, way more fun to see, you know, to see a caravan like, you know, Abby out there flying without, you know, touching the controls, and to watch sailors react to an X-47B landing time after time after time within, you know, 8 inches of a chalk line, no matter the sea state on the USS Roosevelt. I've seen things like that, and I've seen people react to it. I've also seen the pilots lose their minds over the fact that that aircraft could land, and there was no cockpit in the thing. It could land better and more accurately than pretty much any of our crack pilots. But, you know, that's technology that we need to embrace if we are going to be the best of the best. And if we're going to, you know, I say nothing of overmatch in the military domain. You know, we have got to stay on top of this stuff. But the societal benefits that will come from thinking about this as an evolution of the way the airspace works, I think is really the key. It's also extremely threatening. You know, it's natural to be suspicious of new preternatural to be suspicious of new things, let alone new technology. I saw that, you know, the battery fire questionnaire. As an electric vehicle promoter for, you know, since 2004, I know all about electric fires, you know, and dendritic propagation. So, you know, but these are things that, you know, that allow us to take advantage of the tremendous benefits of an electric motor, for example, and that's just scratching the surface of what we can do over time.
All right. Rick?
So, yeah, so my thoughts here, at a highline level, we have huge opportunities in front of us, and leaning in and having the good technical conversations is going to help us succeed. So there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of change coming. We're going to see, you know, what we're illustrating here, but behind this, 5-10 years from now, are things we're not even thinking about yet. And this process of dialogue, working together with the smartest people on the planet to bring it into being is what's going to let us all be successful, do this safely, efficiently, and in ways that we all get excited about. So I had a college professor, as I'm wrapping up here, who told me, like, everything that can be done in aviation has been done. You're going to be working on a spar or a rib the rest of your life. And so clearly that is not right, and we're living kind of in another set of golden age of aviation. That's pretty cool.
Abby, any closing comments?
Yeah, this is such an exciting time, and I think to Brian's point, we can't think about accommodating emerging technologies. We need to really think about integration. And I know it's a little bit of a teaser for the panel that's after the break, but we will not succeed in our country if we don't all work together to think about how we really vibrantly embrace and integrate all of this, because the benefits to society and the jobs and the prosperity that it's going to bring is amazing, and it really will keep the United States as the global leader that we need it to be. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Abby. Well, I tell you, well, along with Abby, I'm really excited about Tricia's panel that she's going to moderate in a bit. So I think having that discussion now about how do we integrate these new entrants into the system is going to be a great discussion, so I'm looking forward to that. I want to thank our panelists for the great discussion. Really good discussion today. I appreciate you and being here, and Abby, thanks for co-moderating with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you.